love, fate, and a Christmas miracle, all wrapped in one unforgettable story. In the heart of a brutal Montana snowstorm, a struggling single dad and a lost billionaire cross paths in the most unexpected way. Mark Carter, a man with a past he can't escape, has spent years building a quiet life for himself and his daughter, far from the ruthless corporate world that once betrayed him. Emily Lancaster, a powerful CEO used to controlling everything, never imagined that one wrong turn in a blizzard would lead her straight into the arms of the one man who could change her life forever. A simple act of kindness turns into something much deeper, a journey of healing, second chances, and a love neither of them saw coming. But when the storm clears and reality sets in, will Emily return to the life she left behind, or will she risk everything for a future with Mark and his daughter? Betrayal, redemption, a fight to protect what truly matters. And at the center of it all, a love powerful enough to defy the odds. Before we dive into this heartwarming Christmas romance, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a single moment of the twists, the emotions, and the magic that makes this story one you won't want to put down. Now get ready for a tale of love, loss, and the miracle of finding home again. Let's begin. Struggling single dad helped a woman in a snowstorm. Unaware she was a billionaire, and his Christmas gift, the howling wind, swept through the Montana wilderness, carrying with it a bitter chill that seeped through every crack and crevice. Snowflakes, thick and relentless, painted the highway in a blinding white, erasing the lines that separated the road from the frozen expanse beyond. It was the kind of night where no one should be out, especially not a man who had already lost everything. Mark Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his battered old truck, his knuckles turning white. The heater hummed weakly, doing little to combat the cold that clung to his worn-out flannel shirt. The road ahead was barely visible, but he knew this stretch of highway well, every twist, every dip, every lonely mile. It was the same route he took every night, hauling goods to and from the small town of Cedar Ridge, trying to scrape together a life for himself and his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. He exhaled, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Just a little longer, bud," he murmured to his truck, patting the dashboard as if the vehicle could understand his exhaustion. He needed to get home. Lily was waiting. Mark had learned to live in silence, to accept the loneliness that came with his past. He wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, he had been someone, a name that mattered, a CEO with a bright future, a family and a home that echoed with laughter. But that life was gone, buried under the weight of betrayal and scandal. Now he was just a struggling single father trying to keep food on the table and a roof over his daughter's head. The truck's headlights barely cut through the storm as he turned onto the last stretch of road before home. That was when he saw it. A sleek black luxury car sat motionless on the side of the road, half buried in snow, its taillights glowing like dying embers in the storm. Mark instinctively pressed the brakes, his truck skidding slightly before coming to a stop a few feet away. He hesitated, gripping the wheel tightly. Someone was inside. Common sense told him to keep driving. This wasn't his problem. The last time he tried to help someone, he ended up paying the price. But then he thought of Lily, of what he'd want someone to do if she were stranded in a storm like this. With a sigh, he reached for his coat, pulling it tightly around himself before stepping out into the cold. The wind hit him like a wall, stealing the breath from his lungs. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he trudged toward the car, shielding his eyes from the icy onslaught. As he approached, he could make out the silhouette of someone inside. A woman, slumped over the steering wheel. He knocked on the window. Nothing. His gut clenched. He knocked again, harder this time. Slowly the figure inside stirred, and the window rolled down just enough for him to see a pair of striking, deep blue eyes staring back at him. The woman was breathtakingly beautiful, even in the dim light. Dark waves of hair framed her delicate face, and despite the luxurious fur-lined coat draped around her, she was visibly shivering. "Are you okay?" Mark asked, raising his voice over the wind. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then finally she spoke, her voice soft but laced with exhaustion. "My car. It just stopped. The engine won't turn over." Mark exhaled sharply. Of course. Fancy cars weren't built for these conditions. "You won't last long out here," he said. "Come with me, my truck's just there." The woman hesitated, her brows furrowing as she studied him. He could see the calculation in her eyes, the silent assessment of whether or not he was a threat. Mark understood. A woman alone in the middle of nowhere had every reason to be cautious. "My daughter's waiting for me at home," he added, sensing her hesitation. "I just want to get you somewhere safe." That seemed to ease some of her fear. After another moment's pause, she nodded, fumbling with the car door. Mark stepped back as she climbed out, her designer boots sinking into the snow. She was definitely not from around here. Everything about her screamed wealth. Her coat, her boots, even the way she carried herself. What the hell was a woman like her doing in the middle of a Montana snowstorm? She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded, leading her back toward his truck. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answers. As they reached his vehicle, she hesitated again before turning to him. "What's your name?" He glanced at her before opening the passenger door. "Mark." She hesitated, then extended a gloved hand. "Emily." For a moment their eyes met. Two strangers standing in the middle of a storm, their worlds as different as night and day. Mark didn't know it yet, but this woman, this mysterious, elegant stranger, was about to turn his entire life upside down, and this Christmas would be unlike any other. Emily Lancaster had never felt this cold in her life. The biting wind seeped through the cracks of her luxury sedan, its heated seats and state-of-the-art climate control failing against the relentless Montana blizzard. Snow had piled high around the car, trapping it like an animal in a cage. The storm had come out of nowhere, swallowing the road and everything around it in an unforgiving white void. She checked her phone, 1% battery remaining. No signal. Panic clawed at the edges of her rational mind. She had been stranded for hours. What had started as a simple business trip had turned into a nightmare. Emily had flown into Montana that morning, expecting a quick drive to Cedar Ridge to finalize the acquisition of a struggling local company. Instead, she was now fighting off the creeping dread of being completely alone in an unfamiliar, freezing wilderness. Her limbs felt heavy. Her breaths were shallow. The cold had started to win. Just as her vision began to blur, a sudden loud knock against the window jolted her awake. Her heart leapt to her throat. Outside, barely visible through the swirling snow, stood a tall figure, wrapped in a thick winter coat, his face obscured by the storm and the frost clinging to the glass. Another knock. More forceful this time. Emily hesitated. Her instincts screamed caution, but what choice did she have? Gathering the last remnants of her strength, she pressed the button to roll down the window just a few inches. The freezing wind rushed in, stinging her exposed skin. "Are you okay?" The voice was deep, rough from the cold. She tried to answer, but her lips were too numb. The man leaned in slightly, and for the first time she saw his face. Strong, rugged, lined with exhaustion. But there was no menace in his eyes. Just concern. "Your car's not going anywhere in this storm," he said. "You need to get out before you freeze. My truck's nearby. I can take you somewhere warm." Emily's mind raced. A stranger in the middle of nowhere, offering her help. Every warning she had ever been taught about situations like this flashed through her mind. But then, reality crashed down. She was already in danger. She wouldn't last much longer in the cold. I can't feel my hands," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man frowned and pulled his coat tighter around himself. "Can you walk?" She tried to move, but barely managed to lift her legs. When she attempted to push, open the door, her limbs betrayed her, weak and unresponsive. The stranger sighed. "All right, hold on." Before she could protest, the door swung open, and in an instant, she felt herself being lifted. A gasp escaped her lips as he effortlessly scooped her into his arms. The warmth of his body against her frozen skin was almost painful, like thawing after being buried in ice. "I've got you," he muttered, his voice steady, reassuring. The world spun as he carried her through the blizzard, his heavy boots crunching against the snow. Emily, who had spent her life commanding boardrooms and making billion-dollar decisions, was now completely dependent on a man she didn't even know. Within moments, they reached his truck, an older model that looked well-worn but sturdy. He yanked open the passenger door and gently set her down on the seat before slamming the door shut against the howling wind. The sudden warmth of the vehicle hit her like a wave, though she still couldn't stop shivering. The man climbed into the driver's seat and reached for the heater, turning it up to full blast. "This should help," he said gruffly. Emily's teeth chattered as she fumbled with the seatbelt. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate. He noticed and, without a word, reached, over-clicking it into place for her. Their hands brushed briefly, his rough and calloused against her smooth skin. She expected him to say something, to make a comment about how unprepared she was for the storm. But he didn't. Instead, he held out a thermos. "It's just coffee. Should warm you up." Emily hesitated for only a moment before accepting it. The heat of the metal against her fingers was a relief, and when she took a sip, the warmth spread through her, chasing away some of the numbness. The man turned back to the road, hands gripping the steering wheel. "What's your name?" She swallowed, still gathering herself. "Emily. Emily Lancaster." If the name meant anything to him, he didn't show it. "Mark," he said simply. "Mark Carter." She studied him, something about his presence both grounding and unsettling. "Thank you, Mark. You can thank me when we get you somewhere safe." Emily glanced out the window at the relentless storm, her billionaire, world feeling a million miles away. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't in control. And somehow, she had the sinking feeling that this man, this struggling single dad, was about to change everything. The truck rattled as Mark navigated the icy roads, the wipers struggling to clear the thick layers of snow clinging to the windshield. The storm hadn't let up, but at least they were moving, and Emily was no longer sitting alone in a freezing car. She clutched the warm thermos of coffee Mark had given her, the heat spreading through her fingertips, a small but welcome relief. She stole a glance at the man beside her. His strong, chiseled features were illuminated by the dim dashboard light, his jaw tense with focus as he maneuvered the truck through the relentless storm. He was rugged, unpolished, nothing like the men she usually interacted with in her world of high-stakes deals and corporate takeovers. Mark caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" Emily nodded, shifting in her seat. "I think so. Just processing." "Processing what?" She exhaled, staring out at the white expanse ahead. "Everything. One minute I was on my way to Cedar Ridge for a business meeting, and the next, I'm stranded in a snowstorm, rescued by a stranger. It's surreal." Mark grunted. "Not the kind of adventure you planned, huh?" She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "No, not exactly." Silence settled between them, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the occasional groan of the truck against the icy terrain. Emily shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't used to silence like this. In her world, everything was noise. Phone, calls, negotiations, the hum of private jets. "You from around here?" she finally asked, hoping to break the tension. Mark kept his eyes on the road. "Lived here most of my life, moved away for a while but ended up back here." Emily studied him. "What made you come back?" A flicker of something crossed his face. Pain, maybe regret. But it was gone before she could analyze it. "Life happens," he said simply. She wanted to press, to dig deeper. But something in his tone told her that subject was off limits. Instead, she turned her gaze forward, her fingers tightening around the thermos. "I'm guessing you don't recognize me." Mark glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Should I?" She let out a small breath of disbelief. "Emily Lancaster, Lancaster Industries." He frowned slightly, his brow furrowing in thought before he shook his head. Sorry. Don't follow corporate news much. Emily wasn't sure whether to be relieved or offended. People usually recognized her name immediately, whether from Forbes lists or headlines. The fact that Mark didn't seem the least bit fazed by her identity was refreshing in an odd way. You really don't know who I am? She pressed. Mark smirked slightly, the first hint of amusement she'd seen from him. Should I be asking for an autograph? She rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. No, just, it's unusual. Most people do. Well, I'm not most people. That much was clear. The truck jostled as they hit a particularly rough patch of road, pulling Emily from her thoughts. She clutched the door handle instinctively, the momentary jolt reminding her just how vulnerable she was out here. In New York, she was in control. She dictated meetings, made decisions that moved markets. But here, in this truck with a man she barely knew, she was completely at his mercy. Strangely, that realization didn't terrify her as much as it should have. Mark cleared his throat. We'll be at my place soon. It's not much, but it's warm. Emily nodded. Thank you for stopping, for helping me. He shrugged as if it was no big deal. Wouldn't have left anyone out there. Something about the way he said it made Emily believe him. He wasn't the type to leave someone behind. And for the first time in what felt like years, she felt a sense of security she hadn't known she needed. The storm raged on outside, but inside the truck, something else was shifting. Two opposite worlds, colliding in the most unexpected way. The warmth of the cabin hit Emily the moment she stepped inside, a stark contrast to the biting cold that had seeped into her bones. She hesitated in the doorway, brushing snow off her coat before cautiously taking in her surroundings. The place was modest but cozy. Wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace crackling with heat, and the faint scent of pine lingering in the air. Mark shut the door behind them, shaking snow off his boots before crossing the room to stoke the fire. Make yourself at home, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. There's a blanket on the couch if you need it. Emily nodded, still feeling out of place. She had spent her life surrounded by luxury, penthouse suites, private jets, extravagant hotels. But there was something oddly comforting about the simplicity of Mark's home. It felt lived in, real, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. She moved toward the couch, her fingers brushing over a stack of mail on the small wooden table beside it. A few envelopes bore the same official-looking stamp, their return address unfamiliar. She wasn't one to pry, but something about them caught her attention. Before she could stop herself, her gaze landed on a name printed in bold letters at the top of one letter. Mark Carter. She frowned slightly. She knew that name. Her mind raced, trying to recall where she had heard it before. It wasn't from her business circles, but it stirred a memory, something distant yet significant. Just as she was piecing together the thought, Mark's voice cut through the silence. Find something interesting? Emily flinched, her hand pulling back instinctively. She turned to find him watching her, his expression unreadable. No, she said quickly, her tone even. Just warming up. Mark's eyes lingered on her for a beat too long before he turned away, grabbing 2 mugs from a shelf and pouring steaming liquid into each. He handed her one, the scent of coffee filling the space between them. She accepted it, taking a small sip, relishing the warmth as it spread through her chest. Thank you, she murmured. You don't strike me as the type to get stranded in a snowstorm, Mark said, settling into the armchair across from her. His tone was casual, but there was curiosity behind it. What brings you out here? Emily hesitated, debating how much to reveal. Business, she answered vaguely. I was heading to Cedar Ridge. Mark nodded but didn't push for more. Silence stretched between them, the fire crackling softly in the background. Then, almost as if compelled by the same curiosity she had felt moments ago, Emily asked, Have we met before? Your name. It sounds familiar. Mark stiffened slightly, his fingers tightening around his mug. Doubt it, he said, a touch too quickly. I don't spend much time in the city. Emily studied him, her instincts telling her there was more to his story than he was letting on. But before she could press further, a small voice called from the hallway. "Daddy?" Emily turned to see a little girl with sleepy eyes and tousled brown curls standing at the edge of the hallway, clutching a stuffed bear to her chest. Mark's entire demeanor softened as he set down his coffee and walked over to her. "Hey, sweetheart, couldn't sleep?" The girl shook her head, rubbing her eyes. Mark scooped her up effortlessly, holding her close. "This is Emily," he said gently. "She's staying with us for a little while." Lily blinked at Emily, then offered a shy wave. "Hi." Emily smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. "Hi, Lily." Mark carried his daughter back down the hallway, murmuring soft reassurances as he went. Emily watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. The rugged, guarded man had just shifted into something else entirely. A father who, despite whatever demons haunted him, clearly adored his child. As she sipped her coffee, her gaze drifted back to the unopened mail on the table. The mystery of Mark Carter deepened, and for the first time in a long time, Emily found herself genuinely intrigued by something beyond the walls of her corporate world. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls of Mark's modest cabin. Emily sat on the couch, fingers wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, her mind still lingering on the letters she had seen. Mark Carter. The name meant something she couldn't quite place yet, and judging by his reaction when she mentioned it, he preferred to keep it that way. Mark returned from putting Lily back to bed, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He didn't immediately sit, instead moving toward the kitchen counter and leaning against it, arms crossed over his chest. His eyes, dark and unreadable, settled on her. "You warm enough?" he asked, breaking the silence. Emily nodded. "Yes, thank you." Another pause. She sensed that he wasn't a man of many words, that he preferred silence to unnecessary conversation. It was a contrast to the world she came from, where everything was fast, loud, and calculated. Here, in this quiet cabin, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Safe. She glanced at him, studying his features in the firelight. He had the rugged look of someone who had seen hardship, yet there was something inherently kind about him. Something in the way he had carried Lily so gently back to bed, in the way he had stopped to help her despite the storm. "You have a lovely daughter," Emily said, finally breaking the silence. Mark's expression softened just a fraction. "Yeah, she's my world," Emily smiled, taking a sip of coffee. "She seems happy." "I try," Mark admitted. "It's not always easy." She caught the weight in his words. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. Instead, she let the quiet settle between them again, allowing the warmth of the fire to fill the space. "I owe you," Emily said after a moment, shifting the conversation. "For stopping to help me." "You didn't have to." Mark shrugged. "Did what anyone would have done?" She arched a brow. "Not everyone would have." He met her gaze, something flickering behind his eyes before he looked away. "Maybe not." Silence stretched again, though this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Emily set her mug down on the table and leaned back against the couch. Exhaustion, creeping up on her now that she was warm. She hadn't realized just how much the day had taken out of her. Mark noticed. "You should get some rest. The storm's not letting up anytime soon, and you'll need your strength." She hesitated, then nodded. "Where should I—" He gestured toward the couch. "You can take the bed, I'll sleep here." Emily shook her head. "I can't take your bed. You're the guest." His tone left no room for argument. She exhaled, realizing she wouldn't win this battle. "All right, but only if you let me cook breakfast in the morning." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "We'll see." Emily stood, stretching slightly before making her way toward the small bedroom he had indicated. She paused in the doorway, glancing back at him. "Good night, Mark." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Good night, Emily." As she closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had changed something subtle, yet undeniable. Two strangers thrown together by circumstance, slowly finding a sense of comfort in one another. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, there was warmth. And for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel quite so alone. The morning light filtered through the frost-lined window, casting soft golden hues across the small cabin. The fire from the night before had dimmed to embers, but the warmth still lingered. Emily stirred beneath the thick quilt, momentarily forgetting where she was. The previous night had been a blur of exhaustion, the storm and Mark. She sat up slowly, running a hand through her tousled hair. The room was simple, yet comfortable. No extravagance, no unnecessary luxury, just warmth and safety. It was foreign to her, yet something about it felt grounding. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, pulling her from her thoughts. She stepped out of the bedroom, her bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor. Mark stood by the stove, flipping what looked like pancakes, while Lily sat at the small kitchen table, swinging her legs back and forth, humming softly. Emily smiled. "Morning." Mark glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Morning, hope you like pancakes," Lily beamed. "Daddy makes the best pancakes," Emily chuckled, making her way to the table. "Then I'm honored to try them." Mark set a plate in front of her, along with a steaming mug of coffee. She wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the warmth before taking a sip. "Sleep okay?" Mark asked, settling across from her. Emily nodded. "Better than I expected." "Thank you again?" They ate in comfortable silence, the occasional clink of forks against plates filling the room. Lily chatted about a book she was reading, her bright energy a contrast to the quiet morning. Emily found herself watching Mark, noticing the way he listened intently to his daughter, the way he made sure her plate was full before his own. It was clear. Lily was his world. After breakfast, Emily helped clear the table, insisting despite Mark's protests. As she reached for a dish towel, her gaze landed on a stack of unopened mail on the counter, the same envelopes she had noticed the night before, and then she saw it again. Mark Carter. Her breath hitched slightly. The name was still familiar, nagging at the back of her mind. As if sensing her thoughts, Mark's expression hardened when he saw where her gaze had drifted. "You're wondering who I am," he said, his voice low but steady. Emily hesitated, then met his eyes. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious." Mark exhaled, setting down the plate he had been drying. "I used to have a different life, a different name in a different world." Emily waited, sensing this was something he wasn't used to sharing. "I was a CEO," he continued, his voice laced with something between bitterness and resignation. "Ran company, built something from the ground up, thought I had everything figured out." Lily had gone quiet now, her young eyes watching her father with curiosity and concern. "What happened?" Emily asked softly. Mark's jaw clenched. "I was betrayed. Someone I trusted set me up. There was a financial scandal, except I wasn't the one who caused it. But when everything came crashing down, I was the one left to take the fall." Emily's heart tightened. She had seen stories like his before, men who had been on top only to have everything ripped away. Some deserved it. But Mark, something told her he wasn't one of them. "I lost everything," he continued. "The company, my reputation, my wife. Couldn't handle it, she left. Lily was all I had left. So, I came here, started over." Emily swallowed, the weight of his words settling in. "That's why you didn't recognize my name. You walked away from that world." Mark nodded. "And I don't regret it. My life may be simple, but it's real. Lily doesn't care about board meetings or stock options. She just wants her dad. And that's all I want to be." Emily understood now why he had been so reluctant to talk about his past, why he had been so guarded. He had been burned before, betrayed by the very world she was still a part of, and yet despite everything, he had built something beautiful in its place. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, not as a struggling single dad, not as a man who had lost everything, but as someone who had fought to hold on to what mattered most. "You're a good father, Mark," she said quietly. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, gratitude, maybe something deeper. He held her gaze for a moment longer before looking away, busying himself with the dishes. The storm outside had finally started to let up, but Emily knew that something had shifted. Between them, between what she thought she knew about life, about success. And for the first time in years, she wasn't entirely sure where she belonged. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a serene, snow-covered landscape. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting golden light through the frost-covered trees surrounding Mark's cabin. Inside, Emily sat near the fireplace, her mind still reeling from the revelations of the morning. Mark Carter, former CEO, betrayed, a man who had built something only to have it ripped away. And yet, instead of letting bitterness consume him, he had chosen to rebuild, differently, quietly. She watched him from across the room as he chopped wood near the hearth, his strong hands moving methodically, his expression unreadable. She had met powerful men before, calculated, arrogant, men who only saw the world through the lens of profit margins. Mark was different. She wanted to understand him. Lily's giggle echoed from the other room, breaking Emily from her thoughts. The little girl had been playing with a collection of old wooden blocks, stacking them into a tower as high as she could. Mark glanced up from his task, his expression softening at the sound of his daughter's joy. Emily smiled. She adores you? Mark straightened, brushing his hands against his jeans. She's my world. There was something in his voice, an unshakable devotion that made Emily's heart tighten. She had spent years in a world where relationships were transactional, love often secondary to ambition. Seeing the bond between Mark and Lily reminded her of what she had been missing. Mark set down the axe and stretched his arms, his gaze meeting hers. "You never told me why you were heading to Cedar Ridge," he said casually, though there was a hint of curiosity behind his words. Emily hesitated. "Business. There's a company I was looking to acquire." Mark smirked, his tone wry. "Let me guess. One of those failing businesses in need of a corporate takeover." She didn't argue. That was, after all, the reality of what she did. But for the first time, it felt different. She wasn't sure she liked how detached it made her sound. "I was supposed to meet with the owner today," she admitted. "Though, I suppose that's not happening now." Mark's smirk faded. "What company?" She frowned. "Why?" He shrugged. "Small town. I know people." Emily studied him for a moment before answering. "A manufacturing firm. Silver Ridge Industries." Mark's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. It was subtle, just a flicker of something in his eyes, but she caught it. "You know them?" she asked. He exhaled, crossing his arms. "Yeah, I know them." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Emily wanted to ask more, but the moment passed as Lily ran into the room, beaming. "Daddy, come see what I built." Mark's face softened, and without hesitation he scooped her up into his arms. "All right, let's see." Emily watched as he carried Lily to the other room, feeling something stir inside her. Something unfamiliar, something dangerous. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily stepped out onto the small porch. The air was crisp, fresh, tinged with the scent of pine and earth. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring up at the stars scattered across the inky. The sound of the door opening behind her made her turn. Mark stepped out, rubbing his hands together against the cold. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head. "Just needed some air." He nodded, stepping beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. The silence between them was comfortable but charged. The tension that had been simmering between them since the moment they met had grown into something tangible. Emily turned slightly, looking up at him. "Thank you," Mark frowned. "For what?" "For everything," she said softly. "For stopping, for bringing me here, for trusting me enough to share your story." His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I don't trust easily." "I know." The air between them shifted. The logical part of Emily's brain screamed at her to step back, to remind herself that this wasn't her world, that soon she would leave, and they would go back to their separate lives. But her heart, the part she had ignored for so long, had other ideas. Before she could second-guess herself, she reached up, her fingers grazing the rough stubble along his jaw. Mark stiffened, his breath hitching. For a moment she thought he would step away, but then in one smooth motion he closed the space between them. His lips met hers. It was slow, unhurried, yet filled with something unspoken, something raw and real. He tasted like coffee and warmth, like safety in the middle of an unfamiliar world. Emily felt herself melting into the kiss, into the moment, into him. But just as quickly as it began, Mark pulled away, his eyes searching hers with a mixture of longing and hesitation. "This is a bad idea," he murmured, his voice husky. Emily's heart pounded. "Maybe." Neither of them moved. Then Mark exhaled, stepping back. "You should get some rest." She nodded, though sleep was the last thing on her mind. Without another word, she slipped back inside, leaving Mark standing alone on the porch, staring at the night sky as if searching for answers in the stars. And for the first time in years, Emily knew she had found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for. Emily lay awake in the darkened bedroom, her heart still pounding from the kiss she and Mark had shared. She had kissed men before, many in fact, but none had ever left her feeling as shaken as this. Mark was different. He wasn't a man chasing after her wealth, her power, or her name. He was raw, real, and completely unbothered by the world she came from. That scared her. She turned onto her side, staring at the dimly lit ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again in her mind. The warmth of his lips, the hesitance, the longing. It had been perfect. And yet, the way he had pulled back, the way he had looked at her as if he knew this was a mistake, left her feeling unsettled. The next morning, Emily found Mark outside, chopping wood again. It seemed to be his way of dealing with anything on his mind. Silent, methodical movements, burying his thoughts in something physical. She pulled her coat tighter around her, bracing against the crisp winter air. "Morning," she said softly. Mark glanced at her briefly before returning to his work. "Morning." She stepped closer, watching him for a moment before speaking. "We should talk about last night." He paused mid-swing, exhaling through his nose before placing the axe down. "What's there to talk about?" Emily frowned. "You kissed me, and then you acted like it shouldn't have happened." Mark wiped his hands on his jeans, looking at her with a guarded expression. "Because it shouldn't have." Her heart sank. "You really think that? Emily, you have a life somewhere else. A whole world that doesn't involve small-town Montana, and a single dad with baggage. And what if I don't want that world anymore?" she challenged. Mark's jaw tightened. "You don't mean that." She swallowed hard, frustration bubbling to the surface. "How do you know what I mean? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said, voice firm. "Enough to know that when this storm passes, you'll go back to your life, and I can't." He stopped himself, looking away as if catching his emotions before they spilled over. Emily took a step closer. "You can't what?" He looked back at her, eyes filled with something unreadable. "I can't get attached to someone who's just going to leave. I can't put Lily through that." His words hit her harder than she expected. He wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting his daughter, and that made her admire him even more. She let the silence hang between them for a moment before she spoke again. "What if I stayed?" Mark let out a breath, shaking his head. "Emily, I'm serious," she interrupted. "I came here for business, yes, but last night, being here with you and Lily, it's made me question everything. Maybe I don't want to keep running after a life that doesn't make me happy." Mark studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. "And what exactly are you saying?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm saying I could help you with everything. I could help you clear your name, get your life back. You don't have to keep living like this." His eyes darkened. "I don't need saving, Emily." "I'm not trying to save you," she insisted. I have resources, connections. If you wanted to fight back against the people who did this to you, I could make that happen." Mark shook his head, stepping back. I walked away from that world for a reason. I don't want it back. Emily felt a pang of disappointment, but she refused to back down. But don't you want justice? Don't you want to clear your name? He exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. What I want is to protect my daughter. That's my priority. That's all that matters to me. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but she could see it in his eyes. He had already made his decision, and she wasn't sure if anything she said would change his mind. She turned away slightly, folding her arms over her chest. So that's it? You're just going to let them win? This isn't about winning or losing, Mark said quietly. It's about moving on. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. And what about us? Mark hesitated, his gaze softening just slightly. Emily, you have a whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it on a man like me. The words stung, but she refused to let him see just how much. Instead, she nodded stiffly. If that's how you feel. He didn't respond. Emily forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Then I guess I'll be on my way once the road's clear. Mark looked as though he wanted to say something, but instead, he simply nodded. She turned and walked back inside, her heart heavy. She had made an offer, one she thought he might take. But instead, he had pushed her away. And she wasn't sure if she had the strength to fight for something he didn't seem willing to hold on to. Outside, the snow had begun to melt. Soon the roads would be clear, and she would have to decide whether to stay or leave. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the occasional crackle of the dying fire in the hearth, but it did little to ease the tension between Emily and Mark. Since their conversation that morning, neither had spoken much. Emily had spent most of the day gathering her things, preparing for what seemed inevitable, her departure. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, creating thin streams of water that trickled down the dirt path leading away from Mark's home. Soon, the roads would be clear, and she would have no excuse to stay. Emily sat by the window, watching the landscape change before her eyes. She had come to Montana expecting nothing more than a business acquisition. Instead, she had found something entirely different, a life she hadn't known she wanted, a man she hadn't expected to care about, and a little girl who had burrowed her way into Emily's heart without even trying. Mark had kept his distance all day, busying himself with chores that didn't really need to be done. Lily had noticed the tension too, but being the innocent child she was, she had simply asked, "Are you sad, Miss Emily?" Emily had forced a smile. "Just thinking, sweetheart." But there was no denying it. She was sad. More than she had expected to be. Her phone vibrated suddenly on the table beside her, breaking her from her thoughts. The screen flashed with an incoming call from New York. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello? Emily." The voice on the other end was urgent. It was her assistant, Claire. "I've been trying to reach you for hours." Emily straightened. "What's wrong?" Claire took a deep breath. "There's been a development. Lancaster Industries is under threat. Someone is making a move to take over the company. And it's not just anyone, it's Andrew Whitmore." Emily's breath caught. "Andrew, you're sure?" "Positive. He's already buying out shareholders, using backdoor deals to undermine your position. If you don't get back to New York soon, you could lose everything." Emily gripped the phone tightly. Andrew Whitmore was a name she hadn't heard in years. And for good reason. Once upon a time, they had been engaged, set to become the ultimate power couple. But Andrew had betrayed her trust, and she had walked away. Now it seemed, he was back to finish what he started. Her pulse pounded. She had worked too hard to build Lancaster Industries into the empire it was today. She couldn't just sit back and let it be taken from her. "Book me the earliest flight out of Montana," she said, her voice steely. "I'll be back tomorrow." Claire sighed with relief. "I was hoping you'd say that. I'll text you the details." Emily ended the call and set the phone down, exhaling sharply. "You're leaving." She turned to see Mark standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He must have overheard. Emily swallowed. I have to. There's trouble back home. Someone is trying to take my company from me. Mark nodded slowly, stepping further into the room. And you can't fight it from here? Not if I want to win. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Mark's gaze flickered with something. Disappointment? Resignation? But he masked it quickly. I figured you'd leave eventually, he said, voice quiet. Emily frowned. Mark? No, it's fine. He cut her off, forcing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. This is your world, Emily. You don't belong here, her heart clenched. And what if I want to? He held her gaze for a long moment before shaking his head. You have a life to get back to, and I have mine. She felt a lump in her throat, but she nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Before she could say anything else, a small voice broke through the silence. Miss Emily? Emily turned to see Lily standing in the hallway, clutching her stuffed bear. Her big, innocent eyes looked between Emily and her father. Are you leaving? Emily's resolve nearly shattered. She crouched down, to Lily's level, forcing a smile. I have to go for a little while, sweetheart. Lily's face fell. But you'll come back? Emily hesitated, glancing up at Mark, who was watching them carefully. I don't know, Lily, but I promise, no matter what happens, I'll never forget you. The little girl sniffled but nodded, wrapping her arms around Emily's neck in a tight hug. Emily held her close, savoring the moment, committing it to memory. When she finally stood, Mark was still watching her, his expression unreadable. Goodbye, Mark, she said softly. Safe travels, Emily. She turned and walked out the door, feeling the weight of her decision with every step. The cold air hit her as she stepped outside, but nothing compared to the chill settling in her heart. She was leaving. But why did it feel like she was making the biggest mistake of her life? Emily sat stiffly in the back of the car as it rumbled down the newly cleared roads leading away from Mark's cabin. She gripped her phone tightly in her lap, her mind racing despite the quiet hum of the engine. The snow-covered trees blurred past the window, but all she could see was the image of Mark standing in the doorway, watching her leave. And Lily, her sweet, innocent face filled with confusion and sadness. The moment replayed over and over in her mind, twisting the knife deeper into her chest. She had made the right decision, hadn't she? New York was where she belonged. Lancaster Industries was her legacy, her life's work. She couldn't let Andrew Whitmore steal it from her. This was what she had worked for, fought for. So why did she feel like she was leaving behind something even more important? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. Claire's name flashed across the screen. Emily took a steadying breath before answering. Emily, thank God you picked up, Claire said breathlessly. I have everything arranged. Your flight leaves in 4 hours. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. We need to go over the strategy as soon as you land. Emily closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her temple. Understood. Send me everything you have, I'll review it on the plane. I will, and Emily. Claire hesitated before continuing. Are you okay? You sound off. Emily forced a small smile, though no one could see it. I'm fine, Claire. Just tired. All right. I'll see you soon. The call ended, leaving Emily in silence once more. She turned her gaze back to the snowy landscape outside, her fingers tightening around the phone. She had thought leaving Mark and Lily behind would be difficult. She hadn't realized it would feel impossible. Back at the cabin, Mark stood at the window, staring out at the empty road where Emily's car had disappeared. His jaw was clenched, his heart a heavy weight in his chest. He had known this would happen. He had told himself from the very beginning that Emily was never meant to stay. And yet he had hoped. Lily's soft sniffles pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see her standing near the couch, her stuffed bear clutched tightly in her arms. She's really gone? Lily asked, her voice small. Mark exhaled slowly, kneeling beside his daughter. Yes, sweetheart. She had to go. Lily frowned. But why? She said she liked it here. She said she liked us. Mark's throat tightened. She does like us, Lily. But sometimes people have to go back to where they belong. Lily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. But she belongs here. Mark had no answer for that. He pulled Lily into his arms, holding her close as she buried her face in his shoulder. He wished he could tell her that Emily would come back, that she would realize what they had meant to each other and change her mind. But Mark had learned a long time ago that life didn't work that way. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but for Mark, the warmth of Emily's presence had already faded into a memory. The house felt quieter than it ever had before. Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of him. The steam had long since faded, leaving it cold, just like the emptiness in his chest. Lily sat across from him, absently stirring her cereal with her spoon. She hadn't said much since Emily left, and Mark didn't know how to fix it. He could barely fix himself. "Daddy." Lily's small voice finally broke the silence. Mark looked up. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Miss Emily will come back?" Mark swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his emotions in check. "I don't know, Lily. She has a lot waiting for her back in New York." Lily pushed her bowl away, no longer interested in eating. "But she was happy here. I know she was." Mark reached across the table and took her little hand in his. "I know, sweetheart. But sometimes people have to make hard choices." Lily's lower lip quivered, and she blinked away tears. "I miss her." Mark felt his heart tighten. "I miss her too." They sat in silence for a long moment, neither of them knowing what to say. Then the phone rang. Mark hesitated before reaching for it, his pulse quickening. But when he saw the caller ID, he exhaled sharply. It wasn't Emily. "Hello?" "Mark." The voice on the other end was familiar but laced with urgency. It was Jake, an old friend from town. "We got a problem," Mark frowned. "What kind of problem?" "It's about Silver Ridge Industries. Looks like someone's trying to buy up what's left of the company." Mark's grip on the phone tightened. Silver Ridge Industries? The very company Emily had come to Montana to acquire. "Who's behind it?" Mark asked, his jaw tightening. Jake sighed. "Andrew Whitmore." Mark felt his stomach drop. The name was one he had hoped never to hear again. "You sure?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah, and from what I hear, he's making moves fast. If he gets control of Silver Ridge, it's not going to end well for this town." Mark ran a hand through his hair. He had tried to leave that world behind, to keep himself and Lily away from the corruption and greed that had once cost him everything. But now, it was coming back to his doorstep. "Mark, we need to do something before it's too late," Jake continued. "I know you don't want to get involved, but if Whitmore takes over, we're done for." Mark closed his eyes, weighing his options. He had promised himself he wouldn't go back. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the town. It was about Lily. And whether he wanted to admit it or not, it was about Emily too. "All right," Mark finally said. "I'll handle it." He ended the call and set the phone down. Lily watched him closely. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Mark forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just some business to take care of." But deep down, he knew the truth. He was going to have to face his past, and that meant seeing Emily again. The cold wind whipped through the small town of Cedar Ridge as Mark parked his truck outside the town hall. The streets, still dusted with melting snow, were unusually quiet for a weekday. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for what was about to unfold. Mark stepped out, adjusting his jacket against the chill, his mind still replaying the conversation with Jake. Andrew Whitmore. It was a name Mark had hoped never to hear again, but now it was back, threatening not only his town but everything he had fought to rebuild. As he walked up the steps, he caught sight of Jake waiting for him near the entrance. The older man nodded, grimly. "They're inside," Jake said. Mark nodded, steadying himself. "Let's do this." They pushed through the heavy doors and entered the town hall where a small group had gathered. At the center of it all stood Andrew Whitmore. He looked exactly the same, sharp suit, slicked back hair, and the air of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. Emily was there too. Mark's breath caught when he saw her standing near the back of the room, her arms crossed over her chest. Their eyes met for a brief second, and in that moment, all the unresolved feelings came rushing back. But there was no time to dwell on them. Right now, there were bigger problems to face. Andrew turned, his smirk widening when he saw Mark. "Carter," he said smoothly, as if they were old friends. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Mark clenched his fists but kept his voice calm. "I'm here to make sure you don't destroy this town." Andrew let out a low chuckle. "Destroy? No. No, I'm here to save it. Silver Ridge Industries is failing, Mark. The town's economy is hanging by a thread. I'm simply offering a way out." Mark's jaw tightened. "You mean you're offering a way to line your own pockets?" Andrew shrugged. "Business is business." Emily stepped forward then, her voice firm. "Andrew, we both know this isn't about saving the town. You want control of Silver Ridge so you can strip it for parts and sell off whatever's left. That's not a solution. That's gutting a community." Andrew's smirk faltered for a second, but he recovered quickly. "And what exactly do you plan to do about it, Emily? You walked away from this deal when you left. Do you even have the authority to stop me?" Mark looked at Emily, surprised. "You left?" She glanced at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "I was going to finalize the acquisition, but then other things got in the way." Mark knew exactly what those other things were, and for the first time since she had left, hope flickered inside him. Jake stepped forward. "Mark, the town is with you on this. If there's a way to stop him, we need to take it." Mark exhaled, turning back to Andrew. "I'll find another way, one that doesn't involve selling out to you." Andrew shook his head in amusement. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "You don't have the resources, Carter." Emily took a deep breath, stepping beside Mark. "But I do." The room went silent. Even Andrew seemed momentarily caught off guard. Mark turned to her, searching her face. "Emily?" She met his gaze with quiet determination. "If we work together, we can save Silver Ridge. We can stop him." Mark had spent years convincing himself he didn't need anyone, that he could do it all on his own. But now, standing beside Emily, he realized something important. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to fight alone. Andrew exhaled, his expression unreadable. "Well, this just got interesting." Mark didn't take his eyes off Emily. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It did." The tension in the town hall was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark stood still, his gaze locked on Emily as her words echoed in his mind. "If we work together, we can save Silver Ridge. We can stop him." For years, Mark had refused to rely on anyone but himself. But Emily wasn't just anyone. And the way she stood beside him, unwavering, made something deep inside him shift. Andrew Whitmore, ever the businessman, clapped his hands together slowly, breaking the silence. "Well, I must say I didn't expect this." Emily Lancaster throwing her lot with Mark Carter? That's quite the turn of events. Emily squared her shoulders. "I'm not throwing in my lot with anyone. I'm standing up for what's right. And we both know your plan isn't about saving this town. It's about taking whatever you can and leaving it worse off than before." Andrew smirked. "Come now, Emily. Let's not be dramatic. Business is business. And last I checked, you were in the same game." Mark stepped forward then, his patience wearing thin. "We're done here, Andrew. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. The people of this town aren't going to let you waltz in and take what isn't yours." Andrew chuckled, completely unfazed. "I wouldn't be so sure about that, Carter. Some of them see the bigger picture. They understand that sometimes sacrifices have to be made for progress." "Sacrifices?" Mark's fists clenched at his sides. "You mean gutting this town and leaving people jobless? That's not progress. That's greed." Before Andrew could respond, the doors to the town hall burst open. A frazzled-looking man hurried in, whispering urgently into Jake's ear. Mark frowned, watching as Jake's expression darkened. Jake turned to Mark. "We have a problem." Mark's stomach sank. "What kind of problem?" Jake exhaled sharply. "Andrew's already started buying out key assets. Several small businesses have already signed over their stakes in Silver Ridge. If we don't act now, he'll have enough leverage to take over completely. Emily's face paled. That's not possible. The deal isn't final yet. Andrew smirked. Not yet. But it will be soon. That's the beauty of knowing how to play the game, sweetheart. Mark's patience snapped. This isn't a game, Whitmore. This is people's lives. Andrew shrugged. And that's why they need a leader who knows what he's doing. Someone who can make the tough calls. Emily took a step forward, her voice laced with determination. And that's not you. Andrew raised an eyebrow. Oh? And who do you think it is? You? Emily didn't hesitate. If that's what it takes. Mark's eyes widened slightly as he looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. She wasn't backing down. She was willing to fight. Andrew let out a slow, amused breath. Well, this just got interesting. Mark turned to Jake. How much time do we have before the contracts are finalized? Jake glanced at the papers in his hand. Not long, maybe a day or two. Mark nodded, his mind racing. Then we have work to do. Emily looked at him, determination shining in her eyes. Then let's get to it. For the first time in years, Mark felt like he wasn't standing alone. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. The urgency in the air was palpable, as Mark, Emily, and Jake gathered in the small conference room at the town hall. The stakes had never been higher. If they didn't act fast, Andrew Whitmore would finalize his takeover of Silver Ridge, leaving the town vulnerable to his corporate greed. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. We need leverage, something that forces the town to reconsider before it's too late. Emily nodded. I have a few contacts in the business world who might be able to help, but we don't have much time. If Andrew finalizes those contracts, it'll be nearly impossible to undo the damage. Jake leaned forward. There's one option. The contracts haven't been legally processed yet. If we can convince a majority of the stakeholders to revoke their agreements before the paperwork is officially filed, we can stop Andrew. Mark exhaled. That means we need to start making calls. We need to talk to every single business owner and show them what's really happening. Emily pulled out her phone. I'll start with the larger investors. If we can get a few of them on our side, the smaller businesses will follow. The room erupted into action as they divided the calls among themselves. Hours passed as they reached out to stakeholders, explaining the dire consequences of Andrew's takeover. Slowly but surely, people began to listen. Then a knock on the door interrupted their progress. Andrew Whitmore strolled in, his ever-present smirk firmly in place. Well, a last-minute rebellion? That's adorable, but it won't change anything. Mark stood, meeting Andrew's gaze. We're not letting you destroy this town. Andrew chuckled. I'm not destroying anything. I'm building something better. You can't stop progress, Carter. Emily stepped beside Mark, her eyes sharp. This isn't progress, this is theft, and the town sees that now. We've already spoken to more than half the stakeholders. They're pulling out of the deal. For the first time, Andrew's smirk faltered. You're bluffing, he said, though there was uncertainty in his tone. Jake tossed a stack of signed revocation agreements onto the table. Read it and weep, Whitmore. Andrew's eyes darkened as he flipped through the papers. This isn't over. Mark crossed his arms. Oh, it is. You lost. Now get out of our town. Andrew's jaw clenched, but he knew when he was beaten. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed out. As the door shut behind him, a collective breath of relief filled the room. Emily turned to Mark, a slow smile spreading across her face. We did it. Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Yeah, we did. Jake grinned. I think this calls for a celebration. Emily laughed. Agreed. But first there's something I need to do. She turned to Mark, her expression softer now. Can we talk? Mark hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Let's talk. For the first time in a long time, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a future worth fighting for. The town of Cedar Ridge buzzed with an energy it hadn't felt in years. The townspeople, once uncertain about their future, now had hope. The defeat of Andrew Whitmore wasn't just a business victory, it was a statement. Silver Ridge Industries would remain in the hands of the people who cared about it the most. Mark stood outside the town hall, taking in the crisp December air. The snow had settled into a soft, powdery blanket, covering the streets like something out of a Christmas card. A few feet away, Emily was talking to Jake, her breath visible in the cold. She looked radiant, even bundled in her coat and scarf, the glow of success mingling with something deeper, something Mark wasn't sure he, was ready to name. As if sensing his gaze, Emily turned and met his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she excused herself from Jake and walked toward him. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through hanging between them. Finally, Emily exhaled, her breath a cloud in the frigid air. "I meant what I said in there, Mark. I'm not going back to New York. At least not for good." Mark's heart clenched. "Emily, no!" she interrupted, shaking her head. "Let me say this. When I left, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was choosing the life I was meant to have. But the truth is that life doesn't feel right anymore. Not without you. Not without Lily." Mark searched her eyes, looking for hesitation. He found none. "You're sure?" She nodded, smiling slightly. "I've never been more sure of anything." For the first time in what felt like forever, Mark allowed himself to believe in something again. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "So what happens now?" Emily laughed softly. "I was hoping you'd tell me." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think we figure it out. Together." Her smile widened. I liked the sound of that. And then, before either of them could say another word, Mark leaned in and kissed her. It was slow, unhurried, filled with all the things they had left unsaid. When they finally pulled away, Emily sighed, resting her forehead against his. "Merry Christmas, Mark," she whispered. Mark smiled, pulling her close. "Merry Christmas, Emily." A few feet away, Lily peeked out from behind the town hall doors, her face lighting up as she saw them together. She clapped her hands excitedly before running over, throwing her arms around both of them. "Does this mean Miss Emily is staying?" Mark looked at Emily, his heart full. "Yes, sweetheart, she's staying." Lily let out a delighted squeal, hugging them even tighter. And as the snow continued to fall around them, Mark realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in for a long time. He had finally found home again. And this Christmas, it was complete. And that, my friends, is the story of love, redemption, and a Christmas miracle. Now we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. We're always excited to see how far our stories travel across the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Share this video with a friend who loves heartwarming romances. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to bring you more amazing stories. Wishing you love, warmth, and a little Christmas magic wherever you are. See you in the next video.